haven't checked the weather yet, but I know it is the perfect day to chat about adult Jewish literature. I'm Cheryl Stahl. Thanks for joining me here at Nice Jewish Books. It is the start of a new year, and I am happy to begin with an uplifting novel. Today I have with me Rebecca Wolf to speak about her book, Alive and Beating. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And please tell me about your book.
Sure. I have a copy here just to show everyone the cover.
The cover is lovely. It is a red flower that looks like it's been dropped into a sky blue pond with ripples emanating from it. I'll post a picture of it in the show notes.
So my book is a fiction novel that follows 6 characters from diverse backgrounds and neighborhoods all throughout Jerusalem, all of whom are awaiting organ transplants on the day that will change their lives. And the story is inspired by the true story of a childhood friend of mine, which I can talk about maybe later in the podcast. But I decided to write a fictional story for many reasons, and it came out in March. And thankfully, I'm still talking about it now in January. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So it starts with a young woman, an American, who's on a bus, which suicide murderer appears on, blows up the bus, and she's declared brain dead and becomes the organ donor. So you know right away that there are these,
Right.
that this is what's going to be happening. So there are 2 narratives in Judaism. One is that we should not desecrate a body and that it should be buried whole. And another is pikuach nefesh, or saving of a life. And can you talk about how these 2 competing narratives relate to organ donation?
Sure. I mean, it's a heavy, big, loaded question, and definitely something that I'm going to speak about as a layperson, not as a rabbi. But I can also talk about it within the context, actually, of my friend whose story this inspired, if that's okay if I...
Absolutely.
Now to answer the question. So my story is inspired by my friend Elisa Flato, who, just like my character in the book, was in Israel for a semester, and for the Passover, right before Passover, her school was on vacation and she was going with a few friends to the beach. They were going to Gush Katif, which at the time was in the Gaza Strip, but it was controlled by Israel. And the bus that she was on, a suicide bomber rammed his truck into the bus and exploded himself. And Elisa was mortally wounded, but actually only in one way. There was a piece of shrapnel that struck her brainstem. So she was otherwise this perfectly healthy, perfectly intact 20-year-old woman. So her family was in America, and they told them to come. That her father got on a plane right away. They said, your daughter has a critical head injury. And when they came, they basically said, can we donate her organs? Now, this was not common in Israel then, because in 1995, the only way that death was considered in Israel was cardiac death, when the heart stops. In fact, it wasn't until 2008 that they changed the rules and also allowed for brain death with pulmonary death. But without getting too technical, one of the reasons my friend was so, literally changed the world, is that when her dad and her mom and dad spoke to all these different doctors and rabbis, both in Israel and in America, and it was decided that yes, she could donate her organs, she was really the catalyst for change within the whole Jewish world to look at organ donation differently. So this concept that you talked about with desecrating the body, it is definitely something that is a concern for many religions, not only Judaism, Islam, even religions like Confucianism, which many Chinese people practice. These are all concerns. But as you said, Judaism also puts an enormous weight of saving a life. And so there have now been, thankfully, criteria that are established that, again, are technical. I won't get into all the specifics of what they have to do, but there are tests that have, I think, three markers that have to be repeated three times over a certain number of hours. And after that, it can be established brain death. And then generally, I'm sure there are many rabbis that agree and many rabbis that disagree, but generally now there is a practice where even Orthodox Jewish people will donate their organs. And I just want to say one more thing, which is that it's been very interesting, especially in Israel, that not only has this had an impact and more people now are registered organ donors, but this has had a huge impact also with live organ donations, which most of the time is only a kidney. But Israel now is one of the leading countries in the world for live kidney donations. And so it's amazing over the past 30 years, like what, again, my friend, I really want to give her the credit. And my book is such a tribute to her for that reason, because she really changed the way people think about it.
Well, I'm so sorry for the loss of your friend, but it sounds like her memory is truly a blessing, not just for you, but for a huge number of people all over the world.
Absolutely, yes.
So you have a really very diverse group of characters. So we have Leah, who's a young Hasidic woman who's in kidney failure. Yael, who's a secular Jew who has cystic fibrosis, who's the only child of Holocaust survivors. Hoda is a Palestinian widow who's a hairstylist, who's also in kidney failure. David is a Jewish Iraqi restaurant owner with forgot to write down all the names of all the diseases, but he needs a new liver.
That's okay. Oh, I can't even pronounce his disease, but it's some kind of very serious liver disease, yes.
Severin is a Catholic priest who is diabetic and needs a new pancreas. And this one really caught me since I'm also a type 1 diabetic. And I know that a pancreas transplant is very unusual unless they also need a kidney or some other transplant. But he's a special case of being unaware of when his blood sugar is going down. So it's, deadly for him that he doesn't feel it.
If I can interrupt you for 1 second, one of the things I learned actually on a podcast with another interviewer who was a type 1 diabetic, in America, they will only do a pancreas transplant in tandem with a kidney, like you just said. But in Israel, they actually will do just a pancreas transplant.
Oh, interesting.
So it was very interesting thing that I learned from someone else. So I'm going to pass it on.
Okay, great. Good to know. But it sounds like he did have an extra extenuating circumstance anyway.
Yeah.
And then Yusef and Yosef are two teenagers, 15 and 16. One's Arab, one's Jewish, both in need of a new heart. And it's, a very diverse group of characters with this same underlying need for a new organ, but they're also really interconnected. And when I first read it, it was like, yeah, it's kind of a little bit too magic. It's a little magically made up. And then I'm thinking, in Jerusalem, it really could be, that, people are, just one or two connections away from each other.
That's absolutely what I thought too, which is I feel places like this, it's usually 6 degrees of separation, but in Jerusalem, it's often 1 degree of separation. And one of the things I find so fascinating about Jerusalem is I almost feel like it's a microcosm for the whole world because it's so diverse in every way, not only religiously, and yet it's so small. You can walk all across it in a couple of hours. And so to me, it was one of the reasons I kept it as the setting because I feel like it's so interesting to show how there actually is a taxi driver that could really be connected.
Yeah, so the taxi driver is Srulik, who is Yael's father, and he has a connection to Hoda, who is the widow hairstylist, because her husband was a mechanic. And when Srulik's taxi broke down, uh, this mechanic helped him. So, in gratitude, Srulik told taxi driver friends, this is a great guy. He helped me out in a crisis. He gave me a good price. Go to him. So they had this, lifelong connection after that. And that, let's see, he also drives Hindi, who's Leah's mother. They have a connection also.
Yes. I tried to make a connection with all of the characters except at the very end with the boys in the hospital because I thought that might be pushing it too much if it's literally every single one. But with all the other characters, I did try to make a connection. And the last one also, because the last chapter takes place really just in a hospital, there was almost less of a need for a taxi driver because unfortunately the boys aren't going anywhere. So that was one of the reasons that I didn't put him there.
Right. And they started out kind of antagonistic towards each other. One of them had been ill for many years, been in and out of the hospital, and now was kind of stuck in the hospital indefinitely. The other had been taken pretty suddenly. So had been healthy until a few months ago and then deteriorated quickly and was still just so resentful, understandably, of
Yeah.
this illness and did not want to be hanging around with this other sick kid, who just, exemplified how, sick he might end up being.
Yeah, I'm very lucky that my brother-in-law is a pediatric cardiologist, so I really had a great person to talk to when I was doing research for this chapter. I set up the book that every chapter is just a different organ in terms of the six or seven, if you call lungs, two of them that the donor was going to be giving to these people. And so I knew I wanted to have two different diseases where one kid kind of knew this was probably going to happen, and then the other kid just a few months ago is fine. And so he was able to give me a lot of medical detail, but even also a lot of emotional detail of what he sees with his patients and to be able to tell me things that regular people can understand, not only doctors. In fact, the one of the things I put into the book that I remember thinking so interesting is that when kids have a certain medical device, it's called or anyone actually, not just a kid, it's called an LVAD. You don't have a pulse because it's continuously going. And I thought that's such an interesting thing that everybody can relate to. You put your fingers on your wrist, you think you feel something, and then this is amazing so it was really helpful for me to have him give me these little details to put in and to try to make it authentic, both in terms of the medicine and also in terms of the emotion that the kids might be dealing with.
And you also, along with all the emotional stuff, showed that they're kids, that these are adolescent boys who got a thrill when a certain one of the nurses leaned over them and they got a glimpse of some cleavage.
Yeah, I mean, that chapter was definitely the hardest one for me to write because as a mother, imagining kids so deathly ill is so hard, and writing their dialogue, especially like, how do you think you're going to die? Like it's such a hard thing to think about as a mom. And then also writing the mother's dialogue, talking about having kids that are so seriously ill. Um, I'm happy with how it came out, but it was, there were times that even though I knew it was made up, I would find myself crying because I just felt so bad because you know that this is real and there are kids like this. I mean, actually, one of my daughter's friends, 18 years old, just had a heart transplant.
Wow.
So it's really like this is not make believe, this is real.
So the mothers kind of immediately bonded also. And they had known each other from another context, but weren't really friends. And the one immediately gave the other her phone number and said, I'm here for you, call, you're not alone.
Right. I mean, I think that that's hopefully one of the messages of my book, and it's something that I think most people have seen in anywhere in the world, which is especially when you're in a hospital. It doesn't seem to matter what your demographic is in any way because you're there because someone is seriously ill, or even in a good way. Even when you're on the maternity floor and you had a baby, you're so excited and talking to the other people who also had a baby, and
Mm-hmm.
there's just this bonding. And so that's part of the underlying message of my book, which is that we're really so much more alike than we are different. We are all made of the same stuff. And if we would try a little harder to focus on that, then maybe the world might be a bit of a different place. And I know that sounds a little hokey and ideological, but that is genuinely what I believe.
Yeah, I see it. So I thought it was kind of amazing that even though each person only had basically a chapter or maybe two, that you gave them so much context and backstory and just such a picture of their life. So Leah, the young Hasidic woman, we see her struggling not because of her kidney, but because her best friend is about to marry Leah's ex-fiance, and her mother thinks that she should go to the wedding to show that she's over it. But she is not over it. And her mother, Hindi, is also terrified that people will know that she is sick and that this will affect everyone in the family's ability to make a match in the community. If the family is cursed or ill or.
Right. So I mean, that's a truth. When I did research for this book, I talked to lots of people from lots of different communities, and I would never say anything is a universal truth across the board, but certainly there are actual, special needs, as they call them, matchmaking groups. And something like this is true. If someone in the family has a disease, they worry, is that genetic? And it does affect these siblings. Plus, in general, the pressure to get married at a very young age and the worry that, if you're not perfect, it might not happen. And so for Leia, she has these two struggles, but they are intertwined. The major struggle is she's in kidney failure. She needs to get a new kidney to be healthy. But then the other one is she wants to get married because that's what happens in her community at a young age. And all of her friends are married, basically, except her. And she wants to move on to the next stage of her life, and she can't seem to do it. So I tried to I tried to make things as authentic as I could with that.
Yeah, and it's to the point that her mother makes her go to a hospital in Tel Aviv, to take a couple hours worth of buses so that she won't run into someone that she knows in Jerusalem, who would spread the news.
Yeah, and while I know that that can come off looking very mean, I don't think that Hindi, the mother, is a bad person. I think she's flawed, and I don't necessarily agree with what she's doing as a mom, but I do believe that she loves her daughter and she genuinely thinks she's doing what's best for her daughter. It's whether or not that's true is something to be discussed, but I don't think she's a bad person, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm. So, and moving on to another character, Yael, is the daughter of Holocaust survivors. And to them, she was their miracle. They never thought that they'd be able to have kids. And she is a single mother of a girl, Tikva. And she already had one transplant. And after, I think, 6 years, it's starting to fail again. And she needs another one. So she has all these different competing things that she already had one. It even lasted longer than expected, so maybe she doesn't deserve to get another one. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, she's a mother and she needs to be there for her child, or at least make arrangements for her child.
Yeah. So I would say this was my second hardest chapter to write after the heart chapter about the boys, because this woman really is between a rock and a hard place. Even if she gets this transplant, she's still probably not going to be alive to see her daughter graduate high school, go to college, get married. So she thinks to herself, what's better for my daughter? To lose her mother when she's young and maybe more resilient, or when she's older? I mean, it's a terrible quandary to be in. And then also, yes, the survivor guilt of, wait, I already had a transplant. What if there's someone out there that is even younger than me? Let them have a chance. She at least had a chance to be healthy for a few years and travel and become a mother, etc. So it was a very hard chapter to write because I was thinking about this woman. And again, these are sort of, everything is made up, but only to a degree. I spent a lot of time reading different accounts of people that have cystic fibrosis, and this is true. This is something that people struggle with, and so I really felt for her because I could see that she thinks either way is not really going to be a good way for her.
Hmm. Hoda is an Arab woman who's a widow. We mentioned her husband was a mechanic. And because she was widowed so young, the family or the community thinks it would be bad luck to go to her to get their wedding hair done or their wedding makeup. And so she's kind of struggling with just sort of the everyday hairdressing. And her mother-in-law thinks that she shouldn't be doing it at all, that, Islam values inner beauty, not outer physical beauty. And she said, well, why can't I be beautiful in my home, for my husband, for my family? So,
Right.
her business is struggling. She's, arguing with the mother-in-law. She said she lost her husband, but still has the mother-in-law.
Yeah. Yeah. So this chapter was very interesting for me to write because, first of all, it's inspired by someone who's I know whose name is actually Hoda. She is not a Palestinian Muslim. The woman that I know is an Egyptian Muslim, and she actually works in the barber shop in my town. And almost everybody with a little boy at some point meets her. And so when my son was little, I used to take him there for haircuts, and we would always talk about how we're so similar. I mean, I live in a very Jewish community, and she knows everything about Judaism. And we used to talk about how, why can't we just get along? We actually have so many things that are similar. So I was inspired by her to write this character, who I feel for. I feel like this woman is caught in this world. She doesn't really care about the political situation. She cares about her kids. She cares about being healthy. She just wants to get dinner on the table, and she doesn't want her kid to fail math. That's what she is caring about. But then she has all these external pressures, pulling at her and affecting her. Um, and so it was the hardest one to do research on because I don't have many Palestinian friends, so I didn't have anyone that I could really talk to firsthand. Most of what I did for this book was a lot of reading, um, a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of websites about Islam, etc. And, I think that for her, she has a lot of pressure to do everything right. But then the question is, what does right mean? Everyone defines that differently. And so she was very interesting for me to write.
And she's very worried, as you mentioned, about her two sons, the oldest of whom is says he's working at a hardware store to help with the family money, but it's clear that he's becoming radicalized and becoming involved with um,
Well, I don't actually even know, which I know is a strange thing to say because I wrote the book, but I do feel like these characters kind of take a life of their own. I'm not sure if he himself is necessarily radicalized or if he's just being taken advantage of by these other men that are going to be involved in some dangerous activities. He's in it for the money. He sees that his mom is struggling. He knows that she's not well, and he loves her. He's a good son in that way, and he wants to help out. And so he sees, if I do stuff for these guys, they pay me, and then I can help my mom. So I don't think he's a bad kid. I think, again, he's someone caught um, in a bad place, and he's trying to make the best of it. Whether or not that's the right thing to do is a separate question. But as a teenager, we see that a lot. That kids get mixed up into things they don't necessarily know what they're getting mixed up in. And then sometimes by the time they realize it, it's too late.
Yeah. Let's see. Then we have David, who is the Iraqi Jew who owned a restaurant, although he can no longer work there. He's so weak. And sort of to add insult to injury, he can't even help with the family preparations. That he typically made this date jam or date.
It's called halak. Yeah, it's sort of like the charoset that people have on Passover, which is like supposed to resemble the mortar that was used in the bricks that the slaves had in Egypt. So they make it out of dates.
Okay, so he doesn't even have strength to go and pound that. And while many of your characters have really supportive families, his wife is, we don't know if she feels sympathy for him or it's just that her anger at his disease has morphed into anger at him and his inability to participate. So he has to deal with what he sees as this disdain from his wife that he isn't able to function.
Yeah, that's a really good insight, actually, that, we don't even really know how she feels. We just see how she's reacting. And this is something, there were so many things I wanted to try to get across in the book. And a, an illness affect, one person's illness is effect on the whole family and definitely on our relationships, especially marital relationships. I think it's something that from the outside we don't always think about. But when you have someone as sick as this character, and pretty much almost all the characters in the book are, you realize that, they can't plan anything because every day you just hope, am I going to be alive? Am I going to be able to get from the bed to the couch? And you don't realize when you can't look ahead and when you can't anticipate anything happily, that's so hard on the family. Never mind all the rest of it in terms of worrying about the health and, like you said, helping prepare for a holiday and helping at work. So I felt like this was a chapter where I could go into that a little bit deeper and show some of the difficulties that come about in these interpersonal relationships.
And it happens with his son also. And the son says, I miss talking to you. And he's like, what do I have to talk about? I sit on the couch all day.
Right. Yeah. I thought that was just, I thought that chapter was very sad to me because I could imagine this guy who was this big, strong guy and he took care of everybody and he loved to feed people. And then all of a sudden he just feels like, what's the point? He's not productive. He feels like he can't contribute to anything. The other thing I liked about him though, which I just thought was something interesting, and I think it's the journalist in me that likes to teach a little bit with these books, is I liked being able to talk a little bit about the Mizrahi Jews because I think that's something that maybe not everybody is aware about. And I think even to this day, it exists a little bit in Israel where there's some tension between, the European Jews that come from the European countries or elsewhere, and then Jews that are coming from Yemen and Iraq and Algeria and Iran and these other places. And there's still a bit of divide in society. So this was interesting for me to be able to try to put a little bit of that history in there.
Yeah, that's come up several times in the podcast. And I've been trying to get representatives from lots of different Jewish communities, but also in general, people may know that there are Jews from Yemen, Jews from Iraq, Jews from Morocco, but what they don't always know is that those communities had been there for hundreds, 1,000 years, and the
Correct.
Jews were
Right.
kicked out after the establishment of the State of Israel. So those
Correct.
are all refugees trying to settle in Israel.
Yes, exactly. My husband's family is from Iraq and Syria, so I was able to channel a little bit of that talking to my mother-in-law and, getting some of the family history there just in terms of imagining people that even if they love Israel, they miss their homeland. To them, they used to live somewhere else, and that's, important to them. But it was just another little kind of side point in the chapter that I thought was interesting to tuck in there.
Hmm. And then since we can't leave out the Christians, you have Severin, who is a Franciscan Catholic priest. And
Mhm.
as part of his service, he volunteers at the hospital and sits with people in the waiting room, sits with patients, and the nurses ask him, would you please help us in the pediatric ICU, that we have babies that need to be held. That some of them, that the parents aren't around or can't be around. And so he goes and starts cuddling babies. And there's one in particular who's actually abandoned that he absolutely falls in love with. And this brings him to question his path. He really wants to adopt this baby, but he needs to be healthy in order to do it. And it would also mean giving up the priesthood. So he's going through all this anguish. There's so much more than just his health depending on this pancreas transplant. It's a whole different way of life, a whole different path forward for him.
Yeah. This chapter was my favorite chapter to write because it was challenging for me, but in a good way, and that this Father Severin is the complete opposite of me. I am not a man or a Catholic or a priest. So I really had to kind of dive in there into my imagination and try to create this character. But there were a few reasons besides that that I loved it. One is that he was the least stressful character for me to write, and that his diabetes is very serious because he has this hypoglycemic unawareness, and even with his, continuous glucose monitor, etc., he's constantly fainting, etc. But he's not going to die right away if he doesn't get his transplant. So, like, as the writer creating this character, it was less stressful for me because with all the other characters, I thought, oh my God, like, if they don't get this, they might die. With him, he needs it for many reasons, especially to adopt this baby, but his life doesn't hang in the balance in the same way. And I also liked about him that he was this person that had this really sad childhood, really devoid of love and affection, and yet he's such a nice guy. And he gives so much to so many people. He's so caring. And so I love that because I think that that's true in life. I think that we don't always have to hold on to what brings us down, and we are able to, turn things around and make an effort. And I see that in him, that he, even though he wasn't given affection, he's able to give it to others. And so to me, that's very inspiring.
So, do we want to talk about Friar Michael?
I'm happy to talk about him because this is something whenever I sit in on a book club. In fact, just yesterday I sat in on a book club virtually in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, and someone said, "Is Friar Michael gay? Is he in love with him or is he just jealous?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you think?" I think maybe yes. I think maybe he's in love with Father Severin, but I'm not sure that it's reciprocated because I do think that since Father Severin had such a bit of a dysfunctional life, I'm not sure if he even knows how to have romantic love or what that is. So I see him as a little more of an asexual character. But I'm open to everyone's opinion and interpretation because I truly don't know.
So, would it be too much of a spoiler to say what happens?
No, I don't think so. I think, most of my chapters do end ambiguously. And in this chapter, he misses a phone call and telling him that there's a pancreas available. So we don't know. And Father Michael could have picked up the phone but doesn't. So we don't really know what happens. I don't even really know what happens, even though I created this book, but I would guess that he doesn't get it right now. And what will happen from that with his relationship with Michael, with his determination to adopt this baby, even if it means leaving the church, I'm not sure. But I think it will have a big impact on whatever comes next for him.
Yeah, I was so mad at Michael.
Well, thank you. Anytime someone has an emotional reaction, I think that's the highest compliment to any writer because it means that you cared about the character.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as I said, I mentioned to you earlier, I'd read your book a little while ago and didn't approach you right away, but the characters just stuck with me. So,
Thank you.
and then lastly, we have the Yusuf and Yosef, who are both waiting for the heart, and we have the nurse coming in, but we don't know which boy is getting the heart.
I ended a lot of things ambiguously for many different reasons. And two of them are one, it doesn't really matter who it is because everyone is a human being and everyone deserves a chance at life. So it's important that we realize that. And in fact, the transplant surgeon that was very helpful to me with this book, who wrote a blurb on the back of it, he said the organs don't know who they're going to because organs work for everyone. It doesn't matter what you look like on the outside. It doesn't matter what religion you practice, what your sexual orientation is, what the color of your skin is, etc. And I think that's such a smart thing to say because we are all made of the same stuff. And then the other reason that things are ended very ambiguously is that organ donation is really a tenuous operation. I've talked to so many people now over the past year or so, primarily people who've had a family member who have gotten a kidney, but with other things also, with other organs as well, where they've literally been in the operating room, prepped for surgery, thinking this is the day, this is the moment, and then the doctor comes in and says, I'm sorry, there was a problem with the donor organ, or all of a sudden we see something in your blood work is a little bit off. We can't do it today. And so that I needed to underscore that. And in fact, with my friend Elisa, who inspired this book, her organs were donated to 6 people, and 2 of them died actually 2 days later
Oh, wow.
because when you get an organ, you're so sick. Now, granted, this was 30 years ago and medicine has improved, but also your people are very sick if they're at that situation that they're at the top of the list. And so I wanted to make sure that that was another message kind of that came out of the book, that this is not easy. This is not just getting stitches and moving on. These people are sick. They're taking then anti-rejection medication, etc. And so it's not a simple thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned having to do some research. Was there anything in your research that surprised you?
That's a good question. um, I think I don't know if surprise is the right word as much as like inspire me, which is I was so impressed and inspired by the different books that I read and videos I watched of people who are so seriously sick that are so positive and hopeful. And I think that that is one of the things that is really, if you can do it, is the key to trying to live your best life no matter what your health condition. Because I read so many books about people even that had terminal illnesses, and they knew they weren't going to get better, and yet they still tried to make the most of every day. So I would say that was something I don't think I I think I thought when someone has this, they must just be depressed and want to climb under a blanket. For most people, yeah, they cry, they do that. They mourn, but then they say, well, I'm not going to spend the rest of my time crying. I want to spend the rest of my time living.
Hmm.
And that was very inspiring to learn.
So, do you have any projects in the works that you would like to mention?
I am working on another book right now that's almost the opposite of this one, and that this book, my message is sort of that all people are good and we should try to connect with each other. But in my new book is about a murder that takes place in a park, and a teenage girl witnesses it from high up in an apartment building. And here, the message is that we all have a propensity for evil. And so we have to work to squelch that within ourselves. So it's me a little bit looking at the other side of things. Um, but I find it interesting. And I hope this one doesn't take me 4 years to write. This book that I just finished was 4 years in the making. If I can cut it in half and do it only in one or two, I would be really happy.
Well, you had to research six different diseases and six different cultures, so that makes sense that it'd take a while.
Yeah, I also didn't, I've never written fiction before. All my writing was always journalism. So this concept of having to make things up and not having just have the facts in front of me was also interesting and challenging.
And I'll just mention, lest someone be afraid that this is all a dissertation on what all these illnesses are, it's not. You talk about them just enough to show how it affects the person living with them. So don't people shouldn't be worried that they're going to get bogged down in medical jargon and stuff.
I try not to bog anything down. And actually, that's the one place where I think being a journalist helped me because so much of journalism is taking something very complicated and writing it just in simple terms for everyone to understand. And so I tried to do that here. And like you said, I tried to do it just enough that you can appreciate what the person is suffering from, but not so much that you need a medical degree to understand it.
Yep, you did good on that. You did well. So, is there anything you would like to mention about the book that I haven't thought to ask you about?
Well, I'll tell you one interesting thing for me that was challenging that I hope people pick up on when they read. I tried to make the book take place within 36 hours because I wanted to underscore the urgency of, the time constraints of organ donation. And so it was hard to write that because I didn't write everything all together. I sort of did each chapter at a time, finishing one person's story. And so it was only after, let's say, I'd write a second or third chapter and realize, wait a minute, I just made this whole scene take place in the morning, but if it's going to correspond with the other chapter, then everything has to happen at night. And then I'd have to scratch everything and write it all over again. And so that might have been a little ambitious for myself for my first book, but I think I did it right. Once in a while, somebody will call me up and say, are you sure that's right? I looked at it and I think, oh God, I can't, I can't. Um, but that was something to me that was, I hope people will capture that this is everyone's chapters happening on that same day.
All right, thanks. So, if someone were to use your book as a call to action for tikkun olam, for repairing the world, what would it be? Or what call to action would you like to give based on your book or not?
Well, based on my book, I would say I think that most people, as we talked about before, one-on-one, certainly in a hospital setting, but I think really almost anywhere, I think most people can get along. I think most people can find some kind of commonality. And in terms of my book, you realize most people have some pain that they're dealing with, whether it's outwardly and obvious, like you're waiting for a heart transplant, or something small, like someone in your family is suffering from something and you're feeling sad about it. And I think that if we all tried to look at each other and say, I'm going to give this person the benefit of the doubt and just try to be nice, I think that would be a great way for Tikkun Olam. So that's what I hope comes out of here that just we should try to remember our shared humanity and that we are more similar than we are different.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So if someone would like to contact you, what is the best way?
Sure. Well, I have a website, which is RebeccaWolfAuthor.com. And then I also have an email, authorRebeccaWolf@gmail.com. So either one of those would be great. I have an Instagram, which is @AliveAndBeating. And I love to hear from readers. It's so gratifying. And I've had a lot of fun joining book clubs, both in person and on Zoom. And I always would love to be a part of that. So if anyone is interested, please be in touch.
Great. Well, I will put those in the show notes for people to see. So, Rebecca Wolf, thank you so much for speaking to me about Alive and Beating.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. If you are interested in any of the books we discussed today, you can find them at your favorite Board and Brick or online bookstore or at your local library. Thanks to Dianki for use of his Freilich, which definitely makes me happy. This podcast is a project of the Association of Jewish Libraries, and you can find more about it at www.jewishlibraries.org/nicejewishbooks. I would like to thank AJL and my podcast mentor, Heidi Rabinowitz. Keep listening for the promo for her latest episode.
Hi, this is Melanie Koss, Professor of Children's and Young Adult Literature, and I'll be joining you soon on the Book of Life podcast. I'd like to dedicate this episode to my dad, who I lost to Alzheimer's earlier this year. He was my biggest cheerleader. He encouraged my love of reading. He supported me every step of the way as I followed my dream to become a children's literature professor. He also instilled in me this really deep sense of Jewish pride, and I know he would be so proud to see me championing Jewish books, so this one is for you, Daddy.
The Book of Life is the sister podcast of Nice Jewish Books. I'm your host, Heidi Rabinowitz, and I podcast about Jewish Kidlit. Join me to hear my January 2026 conversation with Melanie Koss, chair of the Sidney Taylor Book Award Committee, about this year's winning titles at bookoflifepodcast.com.